Oi oi, alright. Utopia is American rapper Travis Scott's fourth solo album and first release in 5 years since his influential Astroworld release in 2018 cemented his place as a titan in the culture. Scott is an artist that I actually know more for his features than his previous releases. I don't know why. I know how influential albums like Rodeo, Birds in the Trap and Astroworld are, and from what I've heard I can certainly hear their influence on other artists, but for no particular reason I just haven't spent a huge amount of time with them. And I think that's worth mentioning because I know among the fan base there was huge expectations going into Utopia because Astroworld and his whole discography are held in such high regard. So while I might be missing some context approaching this record, I also get a bit of a luxury of not having too many expectations or preconceived notions. Another thing to note about my perspective going into this is that the album Yeezus is my favourite Kanye album front to back. You know, with my kind of taste rooted in rock music and Nine Inch Nails in particular being a top artist for me, the abrasiveness of that album hit the ultimate sweet spot. So with that in mind, imagine my delight on my first listen to Utopia to find this record absolutely shares that Yeezus DNA. Sonically, it never gets as intense and distorted as moments from that record, but there's a darkness and heaviness to the production that scratches that same itch for me. Modern Jam is built around a simple drum machine pattern like an 808 or 909, and the vibe just screams Kanye. Like I can literally hear his flow over the top of the beat in my head when it comes on. And then we have Circus Maximus, which is very much a spiritual sibling of Black Skinhead with those heavy rumbling marching drums and screams. So it was clear after the first listen that Scott built his Utopia on a sonic foundation of the kind of energy of Yeezus with some of the colour from the Graduation album in the choice of synths, specifically the synth tone in particular. But that's not to say this album is a total Kanye knockoff though. This is just like the starting point, which Scott has iterated on from there. Hyena kicks off with this kind of old school hip hop rhythm in the drum pattern that's used, but the sound of the kit is blown out and distorted, and you also have these bassy synths that deliver as much percussion as they do melody. Then a few tracks in, we have My Eyes, kind of the emotional centerpiece of the record. It's one of the few moments Scott lyrically shows some vulnerability, reflecting on the Astroworld tragedy, which is refreshing in itself. And this is supported by a beautifully treated piano melody and progression with Scott and guests Justin Verner and Sampha adding tender falsetto vocals over the top, both organic and auto-tuned. And this progresses into a driving beat, allowing Scott to deliver one of his most solid flows on the album. It's a clear favourite for me among many highlights. All of the components here are kind of building for a classic album, and yet the gluttony of the streaming age wins out again. It's too long. Most everything here certainly deserves to be released. Almost everything is great, but if this album could be like 10 tracks or 40 to 50 minutes, it would be unbelievable. As it is, we have some filler and a few areas where the editing could have been tighter, either, nixing a segment that lingers too long, or for me, in the case of the Beyonce featuring Del Resto and Kid Cudi featuring Love, possibly combining those songs, because I just feel like both tracks have that same kind of melodic shape and vibe. But I kind of understand that at this stage, if you have Beyonce on the album, it needs its own moment. I said most everything here deserves to be released because there are 3 tracks that I would completely sack and not feel bad about. Those would be K-pop, which feels more like a business transaction than a song. Is no disrespect to Bad Bunny, but having him on here just feels like a play to kind of unlock Latin extremes, just as naming the track K-pop is a play to stands of that genre, which is a troll move when the song couldn't sound anything less like it, being a reggaeton club track which has literally no stylistic or thematic place on this already long album. Utopia Twins can just get fucked. It's a boring track that can go on the never-ending pile of trap songs about dudes getting blowies. Like, I'm happy for anyone enjoying some fellatio, but we need to at least have a bit of a moratorium on descriptions of the act for the time being. It's grim, lads. It's grim and a bit cringe, and frankly, like, the topic is covered. We got over thousands of tracks on blowies. Let's just move on. Fiend is the track I'm most surprised I'm not into, given that I'm a fan of Playboi Carti. It has high energy and that kind of 8-bit digital texture typical of Carti tracks, but the execution just feels a bit half-baked and lazy. And while this album certainly shares an abrasive texture, this also weirdly stands out. Baggy, overlong rap albums just are the norm at the moment though, and maybe I'm the one that's past it for putting so much value on a succinct 40-minute record that's a holdover from another era. I just think there's something to be said about the impact a succinct artistic statement like that can make. Overall, I love More Than I Don't Hear. It's an album I've really enjoyed, and I'd put it at about a 7. It could have been higher, but if the fat had been trimmed, but it's still solid. Let me know what you think in the comments and give us a subscribe if you're new here. Plenty more content coming your way. Cheers.